In Colombia, indigenous and human rights organizations denounced an operation carried out by the National Army against alleged irregular groups in the southwest of the country as a new case of false positives. The Supreme Federal Court of Brazil initiated 7 lawsuits against environmentally damaging policies implemented by the administration of Jair Bolsonaro. The Palestinian people commemorated this Wednesday the 46 years since the establishment of the Palestinian land delay. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Caracas, Venezuela, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and now we begin with the news. Stay with us. Now we begin. In Colombia, indigenous and human rights organizations denounced an operation carried out by the National Army against alleged irregular groups in Putumayo in the southwest of the country as a new case of false positives. The human rights coordinating body of the National Organization of Indigenous Peoples of the Colombian Amazon, also known as OPIAC, said in a communique that the operation carried out on Monday, March 28th in the rural area of Puerto Leguizamo left 11 people dead, of which at least 9 were civilians who had no relations with the dissidents of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, as later confirmed by officers by the Colombian Army and the government, including Defense Minister Diego Molano. OPIAC denounced that in addition to the massacre and the kidnapping of civilians, an incumbent governor of indigenous district, Didier Hernandez, was assassinated during the operation. The families of the victims, allegedly executed by the Colombian Army, also denounced that they have not been allowed to see their relatives' corpses. And the ongoing violence sweeping across the country is keeping at least 4,000 people confined in the department of Chocó in Colombia's northeast. Threats from the National Liberation Army and the Gulf Clan, engaged in a brutal dispute to control the territory, are reportedly the cause of the conflict. The community has spent more than 10 days in the confinement due to threats from illegal groups, which, according to regional authorities, deny them even the possibility of acquiring food or accessing health services. The mayor of Novira, León Fabio Hurtado, described the situation as critical and stated there are mines placed on the roads and in and out of the municipality. Given the serious situation, the Bishop of Itzmandó, Jesus Álvarez, also warned the communities are in dire need of food, medicines, and clothes, as a result of the violence that affects Colombia, that worsens while the electoral process moves forward.
As Bishop of the Church of Istina, I beg the brothers of the National Liberation Army to allow us a humanitarian corridor to attend to the immediate needs of the communities of Juntas de Tamala, El Tambito, confined since March 19. Please allow us to reach there.
And following the critical situation denounced by the Catholic Church and local authorities in the Chocó region, the Colombian Ombudsman Carlos Camargo announced from Medellin they are negotiating the creation of a humanitarian corridor.
From the Ombudsman's office, we have the capacity and experience to lead a humanitarian mission to Novita in the department of Chocó, to attend the emergency situation caused by the confinement of 25 ethnic communities, 6 of them indigenous communities, from Middle and Upper Taman. These communities have nearly 4,000 people. We're talking about 900 families, given the announcement of the National Liberation Army to prohibit mobility through that territory. Recently, from the region of Chocó, we have been taking steps with local and regional institutions. We call on the National Liberation Army guerrillas and the Gulf Clan to respect the rights of the communities in these territories, to allow free movement to the civilian population and cease their actions against the community of Novita, in addition to respecting human rights and international humanitarian law.
And now we remain on topic. In Colombia, after the announcement of the full list of presidential candidates and their respective running mates, the first debate of the vice presidential contestants played out on Wednesday. National media organized the debate as part of the electoral campaign ahead of the upcoming presidential elections set up for May 29th. In this context, the National Civil Registry carried out the draw that defines the location of presidential duos in the electoral card. At the same time, the public authority announced the redesigning of the format for counting of the votes, which showed inconsistencies during the elections of March 13th. And the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, asked his country's parliament for more legal tools to continue his plan to fight crime. The head of state deployed aggressive measures over the past weekend after the Central American nation recorded its highest homicide rate in less than 24 hours in a period in a century. The deputy Ernesto Castro, the president of the Legislative Assembly, reconvened a plenary session of parliament on the instructions of the head of the executive. Last Sunday, the deputies approved, with 67 votes in favor, an emergency regime that implies restrictions of rights and guarantees in the midst of a wave of violence that left more than 80 fatal victims in only 3 days. The operation, although backed by the parliamentary majority, has also been harshly criticized for human rights violations by international organizations and other governments who don't have similar situations in their countries.
I think it is an obligation not only of the moment, because clearly the Assembly has empowered this exception regime in which we must follow up. It is not that the state has received a blank check, and it seems to me that the justification was not made on Saturday or Sunday morning when this exceptional regime was approved. It should have been important to give a follow-up. As you know, I understand that the plan has several phases. We have known, I believe, that 4 of the 7 supposed phases, but there is no clarity. And as I say, there are hypotheses of a possible negotiation between the government and the gangs, and that these murders respond to a message from the gangs of pressure towards the state, towards the government. Other considerations that some people have made is that the same crisis is being provoked by the government in order to deviate the attention through this state of exception.
And the United Nations sees the increase in homicides and violence in El Salvador as a highly concerning situation at a time when the Central American country is under a state of exception. The Secretary General of that body, Antonio Guterres, urged that measures adopted by authorities in response to the growing violence must be in line with international human rights standards. Guterres also expressed his solidarity with the families of the victims and Salvadorans living under threat from criminal structures. The UN's Secretary General's statements come in the wake of a sudden crime wave in the country that this weekend alone left more than 80 people dead. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. In Brazil, the Supreme Federal Court initiated 7 lawsuits against environmentally damaging policies implemented by the administration of Jair Bolsonaro. During a single trial, the policies enacted by the head of the state championing the economic exploitation of the Amazon since his taking office in January 2019 will be reviewed. Top of the list are measures relaxing controls on activities such as logging and illegal mining. During Bolsonaro's administration, more than 13,000 square kilometers of vegetation have been destroyed. That is the fastest rate of destruction experienced in the Amazon in the last 15 years. And during the 3rd Congress of Women on Tuesday, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro Moros ratified the commitment of that nation's government to guarantee the rights of all genders. The Venezuelan president emphasized the need to promote new social codes in communities with laws to eradicate violence against the female population due to gender discrimination, biases, and dated misconceptions. Maduro urged the National Assembly, the Supreme Court of Justice, and other bodies to work on the basis of social equity to advance in the adaptation of the legal framework and to be able to combat violence against women. In this sense, Maduro called on Venezuelan themes to define the world agenda for the coming years in order to relaunch the priorities of the national gender equality movement. In Ecuador, Government Minister Alexandra Vela confirmed her resignation as Minister of Government on Tuesday, alleging differences with President Guillermo Lasso over the management of the crisis between the executive and the National Assembly. In a letter posted on her Twitter account, Vela says her country urgently needs to apply the constitutional remedy of cross-death in order to solve the existing controversies between the cabinet and the legislature, but Lasso and his collaborators opposed such a measure. Vela says the constitutional design, the provisions of the electoral law, and the conduct of most legislators hinder Ecuador's progress and the consolidation of its weak democracy. On Wednesday, the president of Cuba, Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermúdez, praised the country's youth vocation of struggle and ability to join forces. The Cuban president insisted on the importance of the unification of Cuba and the well-being of the country. The head of state led the ceremony of awarding the Flag of Honor of the nation's Communist Youth Union to 8 outstanding centers of the country. During his speech at the gathering, Díaz-Canel highlighted the label Vamos con todo, meaning all efforts are put into task or process. The head of state awarded the José Antonio Echevarría and Abel Santamaría Cuadrado medals, as well as the Julio Antonio Mella Order to young people who have an outstanding career in different sectors in the country. And several protests took place in several cities of Haiti in rejection to the increase of kidnappings and the lack of government action to stop the wave of violence that is sweeping the country. Groups of demonstrators carried out a series of mobilizations that have been ongoing for a little over a month, with which they insist on putting pressure on the authorities to implement security policies in the face of the onslaught of criminal gangs. Political and civil organizations that condemned the government's inaction warned that kidnappings and murders have increased dramatically in Port-au-Prince, where armed groups have taken full control of almost every neighborhood. In the midst of the protests, activists took over a runway in Antoine Simon Airport in Les Cayes, Haiti's third largest city, where they set fire to a small plane of U.S. missionaries. Moving on to other topics. In Russia, state-owned energy company Gazprom said it is continuing regular gas deliveries to Europe via Ukraine, while Germany declared an early warning of a possible suspension of supplies. The spokesperson for the energy giant of Russia, Sergei Kuprianov, informed that the supply is carried out in accordance with the requests of the European consumers. For March 30th, the company officials said records showed a flow of 109.5 million cubic meters, which corresponds to supplies under the long-term reserve for gas transit through Ukraine. At the same time, the gas flow through this Yamal Europe pipeline, which runs through Belarus and Poland, fell to zero on Tuesday afternoon at the German point of Malnow, according to data from the operator Gascade. The Russian government, together with the Central Bank of Russia and Gazprom, are due to submit a report to President Putin on Thursday on the implementation of the changes needed to introduce payments in rubles. And at least 2 people died and 4 others resulted injured on Wednesday morning in the city of Donetsk, the capital of the self-proclaimed People's Republic of Donetsk in southern Ukraine, when a shell hit a residential building in the area. The headquarters of the Republic's territorial defense said Ukrainian nationalists fired at least 10.122 caliber shells at the residential building. 29 people were evacuated from the area. And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back. On Wednesday, the Palestinian people commemorated 46 years since the establishment of the Palestinian land delay. Palestine's National Authority convened a central festival on the land of the Gaza seaport in order to encourage the people and support Palestinian citizens living in the occupied territory. Thousands of civilians will take part in this festival, which will be attended by national action leaders and representatives of the community and local organizations. On March 30th, 1976, Palestinians staged a strike against Israel in the most populated cities because Tel Aviv imposed a plan to expropriate part of their territories to impose new Jewish settlements, a decision that spawned Palestinian Land Day. A delegation from the International Monetary Fund, IMF, has arrived in Lebanon to engage in talks with Lebanese President Michael Aoun to try to aid the nation in dealing with a huge economic crisis. The government expects to receive a rescue package to overcome a crisis started in 2019 and which has launched a great percentage of the population into a situation of despair. The IMF has expressed that after their last visit last month, they have been able to witness progress towards an aid program, but still hope for more work on the reform front. Lebanon's leaders are confronted on diverse internal matters and need to get on a consensus on a way to deal with their domestic situation. Prime Minister Najib Mikati has explained that these talks are mandatory if the government wants to find a solution to the crisis. In Syria, President Bashar al-Assad decreed this Wednesday the law number 16, defining torture as a national crime. The president enacted the new legislation as a method of responding to the constitutional obligations of the Syrian state, which prohibits the torture of any person in the country. In this context, the law states that any man, woman, or child involved in any activity of torture inflicted for any purpose shall be punished with imprisonment for not less than 8 years and at least 10 years for anyone who commits torture against an employee exercising his or her duties. Likewise, the article stresses that the law guarantees the right to file complaints, reports of torture, protection of the plaintiff, confidentiality, and protection for witnesses, investigators, and family members. And like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurienglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For Telesur English, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.
Hola, ¿qué tal?